Imagine a person who can't seem to move on from a past relationship, the kind of bond that was once filled with love, joy, and hope, but eventually fell apart. No matter how much time has passed, no matter how many new experiences they've had, this person remains tethered to that lost connection. They are trapped not by the person they once loved, but by the memories, the feelings, the what could have been. They often find themselves revisiting the same thoughts, asking, what went wrong? Could things have turned out differently? Even when they try to move forward, they can't. Each step forward is weighed down by the invisible strings of attachment pulling them back. This is not just the story of a romantic relationship. It could be a lost dream, a once promising career that fell apart, or a vision of the future that now feels unreachable. In all these cases, the person clings to something that no longer serves them. They try to let go, but the harder they try, the more suffocating the attachment becomes. The paradox is clear. The more they hold on, the more they suffer. What if attachment is not just a source of comfort, but also a prison? A psychological trap that holds us hostage to our past? What if the very thing we seek for stability are? Attachments are also the chains that prevent us from growing and evolving. This tension between attachment and freedom lies at the heart of human existence. It challenges our very understanding of happiness, fulfillment, and self-realization. In the coming exploration, we'll look into why we form attachments in the first place. We'll uncover the psychological mechanisms behind them, explore how they can entrap us, and ask the unsettling question, can we ever truly be free from them? To understand why we struggle to let go, we need to first grasp the psychological forces that bind us. John Bowlby, a British psychologist, was one of the first to give us a comprehensive theory on attachment. His work revealed a profound truth. Our need for connection is not just a social or emotional preference. It is a fundamental part of our survival. From the moment we are born, we are wired to seek out and form bonds with others. These bonds, which Bowlby called attachments, serve as the very foundation of our emotional and psychological development. Think about an infant. For the first few months of life, they are helpless, utterly dependent on caregivers for survival. But it's not just physical survival that matters. The infant is also in need of emotional care, of feeling secure in the presence of their caregiver. This bond isn't just about keeping the baby fed or warm. It's about creating a sense of safety in the world. A secure attachment to a caregiver gives the child confidence in exploring the world around them, knowing that they can return to a safe haven whenever they feel threatened. In essence, attachment forms the emotional blueprint for how we view relationships for the rest of our lives. As we grow older, this attachment process doesn't stop. It simply shifts. In adulthood, the bonds we form take different shapes: romantic partners, friendships, even our attachment to ideas, possessions, and statuses. But the underlying need remains the same. We crave connection because it provides us with a sense of stability, predictability, and safety. The people and things we attach to offer us something concrete in a world that is often chaotic and uncertain. The subconscious need for connection creates a profound attachment to whatever provides us with this emotional security. Whether it's a romantic partner who makes us feel loved and valued, or a career that gives us a sense of purpose and identity, we often begin to define ourselves by our attachments. These connections become the mirror through which we see ourselves and the world. They become a part of our identity, what we hold dear, what we are afraid of losing. But this need for attachment is not without its darker side. While attachment can provide comfort, it can also cause immense psychological pain when it becomes dysfunctional. Take, for instance, the case of people who struggle to let go of a relationship that has long since ended. These individuals might stay emotionally bound to their ex-partner, despite knowing that the relationship was toxic or unsustainable. Why do they cling to something that no longer serves them? It's because attachment has become intertwined with their sense of self. The idea of losing the attachment, whether to a person, a belief, or a job, feels like losing part of themselves. Historically, attachment has shaped not only our individual psyches, but also our societies. Consider the case of the collective attachments that hold entire communities or nations together. Nations often form emotional attachments to their identities, attachments to history, symbols, and leaders, people find security in their collective identity. It is this sense of belonging that drives national pride, loyalty, and sometimes even blind obedience. These attachments can be so powerful that they push individuals to take drastic actions, even to the point of war, all to preserve what they believe is the foundation of their safety and identity. Take the example of the American Civil War, where the attachment to differing visions of national identity, North versus South, drove millions to fight and die for causes that had been deeply ingrained since childhood. These were not just political ideologies, they were emotional attachments to what each side believed represented their self-concept, their heritage, and their way of life. The attachment to those ideals made it nearly impossible for either side to reconcile, until the bloody conflict unfolded. In the modern world, attachment has evolved with the rise of consumerism and technology. We attach ourselves to material goods, to brands, and to social media profiles. These attachments may seem more superficial than those formed through personal relationships, but their psychological impact is no less significant. People form deep attachments to the image they project on social media, constantly curating their lives to match societal expectations. This attachment to a carefully constructed identity can be just as powerful as any emotional bond. And when that identity is threatened, when a post doesn't get enough likes, or when someone challenges the online persona we've built, it can create feelings of insecurity, self-doubt, and anxiety. Our attachment to things is not always conscious either. Much of it happens in the background of our minds. For example, consider how people often feel the need to keep up with the latest trends. From the clothes we wear to the gadgets we buy, these things provide a sense of belonging to a particular social group. In a way, we use material possessions as a shorthand for identity. Our attachment to these items can define who we believe we are, even when they don't serve any deeper purpose in our lives. Yet, the paradox of attachment is that even when these connections provide us with a sense of security, they can also trap us. The very thing that makes us feel safe, our attachments, can become the thing that prevents us from evolving, from expanding our consciousness, or from embracing change. We become so tied to our past experiences, our relationships, and our possessions that we fail to see that letting go of them could be the key to our liberation. The attachment to familiarity, to the known, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It's not just about holding on to the people and things we love, it's about avoiding the discomfort of the unknown. Change is terrifying because it requires us to detach from what we've grown to rely on for comfort. And yet, in order to grow, we must be willing to let go. But why is this so hard? Why do we continue to hold on, even when we know it hurts us? The answer lies in the very nature of attachment itself. It is not merely an emotional connection. It is a survival mechanism deeply embedded in our psyche. Attachment keeps us grounded. It keeps us connected to the world. And most importantly, it keeps us from feeling alone in a vast, unpredictable universe. And so, the paradox remains: attachment is both a source of our greatest comfort and our deepest struggle. As long as we cling to the past, whether through relationships, identities, or ideologies, we will remain tethered to a world that is constantly shifting. The question is, can we ever let go? Or are we doomed to be held captive by the very thing that gives us a sense of security? This tension between attachment and freedom will guide us through the next stages of this exploration, as we try to understand the deeper psychology of our need to hold on and why, at some point, we must learn to let go. While attachment is often seen as a fundamental human need, providing us with security and a sense of belonging, there is a much darker side to this force. As comforting as it can be to hold on to relationships, ideas, and possessions, attachment can quickly transform from a source of stability into a psychological prison. It can become a cage that limits growth, suffocates freedom, and entraps us in patterns that prevent us from evolving into our true selves. This is where the concept of toxic attachment comes into play, an attachment that, instead of nourishing us, starts to drain our emotional energy and keep us tethered to destructive forces. To understand the true dangers of attachment, we must first look at the nature of human dependence. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, argued that early childhood experiences profoundly shape our attachments and, by extension, our mental health. Freud believed that unresolved attachments from childhood, particularly those to our primary caregiver, could lead to dysfunctional relationships later in life. These unresolved feelings would manifest in adult behavior, often in the form of unhealthy dependencies on others. A child who grows up with an overbearing or emotionally unavailable parent, for example, might later become overly dependent on romantic partners or friends, seeking in them the emotional support they never received. Carl Jung, a contemporary of Freud, also warned about the dangers of overattachment. While Freud focused on the unconscious drives and early developmental stages, Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming one's true self. Jung believed that a person who clings too tightly to relationships, ideas, or identities becomes trapped in a cycle of false selves. These false selves are constructed from the attachments we form, and they prevent us from exploring the deeper, more authentic aspects of our psyche. According to Jung, the person who refuses to detach from their attachments, who remains forever tied to their past, will never fully realize their potential. This idea is evident in the way toxic attachments play out in real life. Take, for example, the person who remains emotionally tethered to a past romantic relationship. Even though the relationship ended years ago, the individual cannot seem to move on. They keep holding onto the memory of a person, a love that once was. This attachment can take many forms: revisiting old photos, obsessively checking social media profiles, or constantly comparing new partners to the ghost of the past. These behaviors create a stagnant emotional state. The person becomes unable to fully engage in the present, to open themselves to new possibilities. They are imprisoned by the very attachment they once thought would bring them comfort. In more extreme cases, this attachment can lead to unhealthy dependencies. Consider the concept of love addiction, a term used to describe individuals who become emotionally dependent on another person to the point of obsession. Love addiction often stems from childhood trauma, where an individual's need for love and validation was not met in a healthy way. As an adult, they seek out relationships that fulfill their emotional needs, but instead of fostering mutual respect and healthy boundaries, these attachments become possessive, controlling, and even abusive. The person feels as if they cannot live without the object of their attachment, unable to function unless they receive constant validation and approval. But the dangers of attachment aren't limited to personal relationships. Attachments can also form around ideas, ideologies, or material possessions. For instance, consider how people become attached to their political beliefs. In today's polarized world, it's easy to become so entrenched in one's ideology that any opposing viewpoint feels like an existential threat. This attachment to a particular political identity can limit personal growth and understanding. When we attach our identity to a political party, we risk becoming blind to the nuances of the world around us. We start to filter all information through the lens of our attachment, rejecting anything that challenges our beliefs. The same can be said for attachments to material possessions. In a consumer-driven society, people are often conditioned to define themselves by what they own: the latest car, the most fashionable clothes, the newest phone. These things provide a temporary sense of fulfillment, but they are not lasting. Over time, the attachment to these possessions grows, and the individual becomes trapped in a cycle of desire. The pursuit of more stuff becomes a never-ending quest to fill a void, but nothing ever seems to be enough. The attachment to material wealth prevents the individual from discovering what truly brings meaning to their life. Toxic attachment can even manifest in less obvious ways. Consider the person who clings to their past achievements as their primary source of self-worth. This attachment to past success can prevent them from taking risks, from pursuing new goals, or from adapting to changing circumstances. The fear of losing their status or reputation becomes so powerful that it stifles their growth. They remain fixed in a state of nostalgia, unwilling to face the discomfort of reinvention or failure. This attachment to the past, though seemingly harmless, can create a form of emotional stagnation, where the person is forever looking backward, unable to move forward. The danger of attachment becomes especially clear when we realize how it prevents us from achieving true freedom and self-actualization. True freedom is not the absence of external constraints, it is the absence of internal ones. The person who is free from the shackles of attachment is someone who can flow with life, unburdened by the weight of past relationships, past ideas, and past possessions. They are not defined by what they cling to. Instead, they are defined by their ability to adapt, grow, and evolve. To be free from attachment is to be free from the fear of loss. It is to recognize that everything in life is transient and that our worth does not depend on what we possess or who we know. This is a concept that philosophers and spiritual teachers have grappled with for centuries. Buddha, for example, taught that attachment is the root of suffering. By detaching from desires and expectations, we can find peace in the present moment. Similarly, Nietzsche believed that we must embrace the chaos of life and let go of our attachment to order, comfort, and certainty in order to become who we truly are. This philosophy, though profound, is difficult to implement in a world that is constantly pushing us to attach to people, ideas, and possessions, but the consequences of not letting go are clear. Toxic attachment keeps us tethered to the past, limiting our potential and trapping us in cycles of emotional pain and dependence. To break free from these attachments is to step into a space of true freedom, where we are no longer defined by what we hold on to, but by our capacity to let go. The question we are left with is this: how do we begin to break the chains of attachment? How do we confront the very forces that have shaped our identities and understandings of the world? To explore this, we must look at the ways in which we can learn to detach, to release the grip that attachment has on our minds and hearts. And as we venture further, we'll begin to uncover the path toward freedom, the freedom that comes from learning to let go. Throughout history, attachment has not been confined to the personal realm. It has woven its way into the very fabric of societies, dictating the course of empires, revolutions, and cultural movements. Whether it was the loyalty of subjects to kings, the fervent nationalism that ignites wars, or the attachment to ideologies that guide millions of lives, the concept of attachment has been a driving force in shaping the course of human civilization. These collective attachments, while often forged by necessity or survival, have time and again proven to be double-edged swords, offering both stability and freedom, but also control and enslavement. To begin, we must look how attachment to power has influenced entire civilizations. The feudal system in medieval Europe is an exemplary case. The loyalty of vassals to their lords and the attachment of peasants to their kings created a highly structured society that, in many ways, operated like a giant organism. At the top of this hierarchy were kings and emperors who, through the divine right of rule, were seen as attachments to the very will of God. The king was not just a ruler, but a symbol of divine order, of force that the people believed was predestined, sacred, and unshakable. This attachment to the ruler was not born out of love or admiration alone. It was a mixture of fear, reverence, and necessity. In times of war, famine, or plague, kings were the central figures around which the society's survival was constructed. But while this attachment provided structure and security, it also tied the people to a system of exploitation and subjugation. The lower classes, bound by loyalty to their rulers, could not see beyond their immediate allegiance. Their attachment to the crown, though rooted in survival, ultimately prevented them from imagining a different world, a world without absolute monarchs, without oppressive systems, without feudalism. The attachment to power is not limited to the medieval era. Fast forward to the rise of nationalism in the 19th and 20th centuries, and we see the same dynamics at play. Nationalism, at its core, is an attachment to a particular identity, a collective sense of belonging that often excludes others. Nations, built on common language, religion, and culture, demand loyalty from their citizens. This attachment to national identity has been the cornerstone of many of the bloodiest conflicts in history. The two world wars, for example, were fought, in part, because of the intense attachment to nationalist ideologies. People, driven by their attachment to their country, were willing to sacrifice their lives and destroy others in the name of patriotism. This attachment which appears so natural and even necessary for a functioning society, is also a force of profound manipulation. Nietzsche, the German philosopher who explored the human psyche in great depth, warned of the dangers of collective attachment to power and status. He saw the state as a mechanism that enslaves the individual, demanding loyalty to an impersonal force, the state itself. For Nietzsche, attachment to any form of collective identity, whether it be a nation, a religion, or even a political movement, was a way of subordinating the individual's will to the will of the collective. In his famous work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche introduced the idea of the Übermensch or overman, someone who transcends the attachments of society in order to live authentically and freely. The Übermensch represents the breaking of chains, the rejection of collective attachments that limit the individual's potential. Karl Marx also saw attachment to societal structures as a major barrier to human freedom. In Marxist thought, the working class, or the proletariat, is attached to their labor and to the economic system that exploits them. This attachment to labor, often passed down through generations, keeps them in a cycle of poverty and powerlessness. Marx believed that only by breaking free from this attachment, by overthrowing the capitalist system that forces workers into subjugation, could true freedom be attained. Marx viewed society itself as a prison, built on the attachment of the masses to their work, their role, and the hierarchy that maintained the power of the elite. The revolution, for Marx, was not merely a political change, it was a psychological liberation from the bonds of attachment. But perhaps the most profound insights into the dangers of attachment come from Hegel, the German idealist philosopher. For Hegel, history was the story of the dialectic, the conflict of opposing ideas and forces, which eventually lead to synthesis and progress. This process of historical development, however, was inextricably linked to attachment. For Hegel, societies move through cycles of attachment, where each new generation is attached to a set of ideas, beliefs, and institutions. But these attachments are not permanent. The very act of attachment, Hegel argued, creates the conditions for their inevitable dissolution. Over time, the attachments of a society to its institutions, whether they are political, religious, or cultural, become outdated and oppressive. The old system, once a source of stability, begins to stifle the progress of the people, leading to conflict and revolution. History, in Hegel's view, is a constant process of attachment and detachment, a struggle between the old order and the new, between the forces of preservation and the forces of change. The struggle for freedom, according to Hegel, is ultimately the struggle to break free from these attachments. And this struggle is not just a matter of overthrowing governments or changing political systems. It is a matter of liberating the mind from the attachments that bind it to outdated ways of thinking. To be free, for Hegel, was to recognize that the world is always changing and that our attachments to the past must be transcended. If we are to embrace the future, this tension between attachment and freedom is not confined to the past. The political and ideological attachments of the modern world, whether to nationalism, capitalism, or even democracy, continue to shape the course of human history. The attachment to these systems often blinds us to their limitations, preventing us from imagining alternatives. This is why revolutions, from the French Revolution to the Arab Spring, have so often been marked by a desire to break free from the attachments to power and control that have shaped society. But these revolutions also show us the cyclical nature of attachment. New systems of power, once formed, often become the very thing they sought to overthrow, replacing one set of attachments with another. The history of attachment is, therefore, a history of struggle, a struggle between the forces that seek to keep us bound to the past and the forces that push us toward liberation. But the challenge is not simply one of political or social change. It is a challenge of psychological freedom, of recognizing the attachments that bind us, both individually and collectively, and finding the courage to let go. As we consider the historical journey of attachment, we must ask ourselves, are we, too, attached to ideas, identities, or institutions that no longer serve us? And if so, what would it take to free ourselves from these attachments? To answer these questions, we must turn to the present, to the psychological tools and philosophical insights that can help us break free from the chains of attachment and move toward a more liberated and authentic existence. The struggle for freedom is, in many ways, the struggle to detach not just from others, but from the very structures of thought and belief that have shaped us. This is a journey that requires not only historical awareness, but also self-awareness, the ability to confront the forces that control our minds and our hearts. And only through this process of detachment can we truly begin to understand what it means to be free. Letting go. It's a simple phrase, yet one of the most profound and challenging concepts we can confront in our lives. After exploring the dangers of attachment, the emotional prisons it builds, and the cycles of dependency it traps us in, it's time to turn our attention to the possibility of liberation. But how do we free ourselves from these invisible chains? How do we transcend the need for attachment without losing our sense of connection or purpose? The path to liberation is not a rejection of love or meaningful relationships, but a deeper understanding of what it means to be truly free. At the heart of this journey lies a fundamental principle, shared by many of the world's greatest philosophies: the power of detachment. Detaching, however, does not mean abandoning or withdrawing from life, but rather letting go of the mental and emotional attachments that cloud our perception and inhibit our growth. This is a concept deeply embedded in the teachings of Buddhism, Stoicism, and the psychology of Carl Jung. Each of these traditions offers valuable insights into the process of letting go, emphasizing its role in achieving not only personal freedom, but also peace of mind and emotional well-being. In Buddhism, the path to liberation is centered on the practice of non-attachment. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment. Our craving for things, people, possessions, desires creates a false sense of security, one that is ultimately fleeting and unreliable. Our attachment to the world around us creates a continuous cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. To break this cycle, the Buddha advocated for detaching from our desires and accepting the impermanence of all things. This doesn't mean we should renounce the world, but rather that we should accept the impermanent nature of life and find peace in the moment itself. This idea of letting go is not passive. It requires deep awareness and practice. It is the ability to acknowledge our attachments, whether to people, outcomes, or possessions, and then to loosen our grip on them, allowing ourselves the space to experience life as it is. The Buddha referred to this as the practice of mindfulness, staying present, rather than being consumed by the past or future. Detachment in this sense is not about becoming indifferent, but about cultivating a healthy distance from our attachments, which allows us to experience life more fully and authentically. Stoicism, the ancient philosophy of self-control and virtue, offers a complementary perspective on letting go. Stoics like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius taught that much of our suffering arises from our attachment to external events, people, and the outcomes of our actions. The Stoic practice of amor fati, the love of fate, encourages us to embrace whatever comes our way with equanimity, regardless of whether it meets our desires or expectations. For the Stoics, freedom comes from accepting the world as it is, rather than resisting or trying to control it. Epictetus famously said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." This insight cuts to the heart of the Stoic understanding of detachment. It's not about controlling the world, but about controlling our response to it. When we stop attaching our happiness to external circumstances, we reclaim our power. The Stoic approach to letting go is not to detach from emotions or desires entirely, but to shift our focus from what we cannot control to what we can. In doing so, we cultivate resilience and inner peace, and free ourselves from the tyranny of attachment. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who revolutionized our understanding of the unconscious mind, also offered profound insights into the process of letting go. Jung's concept of the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves that contains repressed emotions, desires, and aspects of our personality, reveals that attachment is often a result of unaddressed emotional conflicts. We become attached to people, places, or ideas because they offer us a sense of security, filling the gaps left by unresolved psychological wounds. To let go, according to Jung, is to confront these repressed aspects of ourselves and integrate them into our conscious identity. Jung believed that true liberation comes from embracing our shadow and accepting the parts of ourselves we may have rejected. This involves a deep process of self-awareness and inner work, where we examine the attachments that arise from our unresolved emotions and unconscious desires. When we stop running from our inner truths, when we accept all parts of ourselves, both the light and the dark, we can detach from the external sources of validation and security. We realize that we do not need external attachments to feel whole. Our wholeness comes from within, and this realization is the key to true emotional freedom. Psychologically, the act of letting go can be incredibly freeing. It allows us to release the emotional weight of past experiences and the mental clutter of future worries. When we detach from the need to control, we open ourselves up to a more authentic experience of life. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to the people and things we care about. It means releasing the unhealthy attachments that make us fearful of loss, insecure in relationships, and anxious about the future. The emotional benefits of letting go are profound. First, we become less vulnerable to the whims of external circumstances. When we are not attached to specific outcomes or people, we are not as easily shaken by the inevitable ups and downs of life. We experience a deeper sense of stability because our sense of self is no longer tethered to fleeting things. Second, letting go opens the door to personal growth. Attachment often keeps us stuck in familiar patterns, whether they be toxic relationships, unfulfilling jobs, or self-limiting beliefs. By releasing our attachments, we give ourselves permission to explore new possibilities and embrace change. We become more adaptable, more resilient, and more capable of living in alignment with our true desires and values. Finally, letting go fosters inner peace. When we are not bound by the constant desire to control or possess, we find ourselves living more fully in the present moment. We are no longer consumed by the fear of loss or the craving for more. This peace, this freedom from attachment, is the ultimate goal of many spiritual and philosophical traditions. It is the freedom to live as our authentic selves, not as extensions of the external world or the expectations placed upon us. Letting go is not an easy task. It requires courage, self-awareness, and patience. It is a continual practice, a process of shedding the layers of attachment that accumulate over a lifetime. But the rewards of this process are immeasurable. Through detachment, we reclaim our power, our peace, and our ability to shape our own lives. In the words of the Buddha, when you let go of what you are, you become what you might be. The path to liberation is the path of letting go of all that no longer serves us, and of all that keeps us bound to the past. So, as you look at your own life, consider, what are you attached to? What ideas, people, or possessions have you allowed to define you? And what would it mean for you to let go of those attachments, to embrace the freedom that comes with release? The journey toward liberation begins with a single step: the willingness to let go. Letting go. It sounds simple, doesn't it? A single decision to release something or someone from our grasp. And yet, for many of us, this simple act is one of the most difficult and painful challenges we face. We know, deep down, that attachment can be unhealthy, whether it's an emotionally toxic relationship, a self-destructive habit, or the limiting beliefs that hold us back from reaching our true potential. And yet, despite this knowledge, we often find ourselves unable to detach, unable to let go. Why is that? Why do we cling to what hurts us? Why does the idea of freedom from the very attachments that bind us seem so elusive? The answer lies in the complex psychological mechanisms that govern our behavior. At the heart of this struggle is a deep, often unconscious resistance to change. Change, especially the kind that challenges our identities, brings with it an overwhelming sense of discomfort. To let go means to step into the unknown, to face uncertainty, and for many, that is a terrifying prospect. The fear of the unknown is an ancient survival instinct hardwired into our psychology. Our ancestors who embraced the familiar and the predictable were more likely to survive than those who ventured into uncharted territories. Today, our survival no longer depends on physical threats, but the same mental wiring persists. We fear the unknown, not because it's dangerous, but because it feels unsafe. And this feeling triggers our primal instincts to hold on to what is familiar, even if that familiarity is toxic. One of the most profound psychological concepts that explain this resistance is cognitive dissonance. Coined by psychologist Leon Festinger in the 1950s, cognitive dissonance refers to the mental discomfort that arises when we hold to contradictory beliefs or engage in behaviors that conflict with our values. For example, we may consciously know that a relationship is unhealthy, yet we continue to stay in it because the thought of leaving creates inner turmoil. Our mind, in an attempt to reduce the discomfort of this contradiction, may rationalize our actions. We might tell ourselves that things will get better or that we can't live without the person, even though deep down we know that the attachment is destructive. The psychological conflict that arises from this dissonance makes it incredibly hard to let go, because our minds are constantly at war with our own truths. This internal resistance is further compounded by the fear of loss. Letting go often feels like giving up something that defined us, whether it's a relationship, a belief system, or even a job that we've invested years into. Our identities are often closely tied to the things and people we are attached to. To let go is to face the possibility of losing not just something external, but part of ourselves. This fear of loss triggers a sense of grief, which is often misunderstood or minimized in the process of letting go. In many ways, it is as though we are mourning the death of an identity, of a life that we once imagined for ourselves. For example, consider the case of someone who has spent their entire life in a particular career. Letting go of that career, whether by choice or circumstance, may not only be a matter of shifting jobs, but of confronting a loss of identity. Who am I if not this? They might ask. What happens if I let go of this? The fear of losing the familiar, even if it's unfulfilling, can paralyze us, leaving us stuck in a cycle of resistance to change. Even more insidious is the role that self-limiting beliefs play in preventing us from letting go. Many of us cling to outdated, damaging beliefs about ourselves, beliefs that were formed in childhood, reinforced by society, or even shaped by our own failures. These beliefs often come in the form of internalized messages like "I'm not good enough," "I don't deserve better," or "I'll never be able to change." These beliefs become deeply ingrained, so much so that they shape our entire worldview. The idea of letting go of these beliefs is not just challenging, it feels like a complete dissolution of the self. If I let go of these beliefs, who will I be? What happens if the foundation of my identity crumbles? The emotional discomfort of detachment is another powerful force at play. Attachment is, at its core, an emotional bond. These bonds are not simply based on our mental assessments of the situation, but on deeply ingrained emotions that make them feel almost impossible to sever. Emotions like fear, shame, guilt, and loneliness are often attached to our attachments, and the thought of losing these connections can bring up intense emotional pain. The emotional pain of detaching is not something that can be easily ignored or rationalized away. It must be faced and processed, and this is where many people falter. They might choose to stay in unhealthy relationships, not because they lack the knowledge or willpower to leave, but because the emotional toll of detaching feels unbearable. The experience of detachment is often compared to a kind of existential pain. In letting go, we are not just severing ties with something external. We are confronting the very essence of our existence: the fear of change, the loss of meaning, the anxiety of stepping into a new and unknown self. This discomfort is part of the process of personal growth, yet it remains a massive hurdle for many, in the same way that physical pain is a signal that something needs attention. Emotional discomfort signals that change is required. The problem is that, rather than embracing the pain as a necessary step toward healing and growth, we often resist it out of fear or ignorance. However, the struggle to let go is not entirely futile. In fact, the very act of grappling with these feelings of discomfort is a necessary part of the process of personal transformation. There's a paradox in play. The more we resist the discomfort, the more entrenched we become in our attachments. The more we try to avoid the pain, the more power it has over us. It's only by facing the emotional discomfort directly, by leaning into the pain of detachment, that we can begin to break free from the grip of unhealthy attachments. Ultimately, letting go requires us to confront a truth that most of us are afraid to acknowledge. The process of personal growth is not always comfortable. and it often involves periods of emotional turbulence. But this turbulence is not permanent. On the other side of the struggle is the possibility of liberation, the freedom to live more authentically, to build healthier relationships, and to experience life with greater emotional resilience. So, the question remains, why do we hold on so tightly? The answer lies in the complexities of the human psyche, the fear of the unknown, the pain of loss, and the emotional discomfort that comes with breaking free. But in facing these fears, in confronting the discomfort head-on, we open the door to true transformation. We begin to understand that the pain of letting go is not something to avoid, but something to embrace, as it is the very catalyst for growth and freedom. Letting go is not the end, it is the beginning of a new chapter, a new possibility, and ultimately a new life. In today's world, attachment is no longer confined to people, places, or ideas. It has evolved into something far more pervasive, far more insidious. Modern society has become a factory of attachments, constantly feeding us new ways to anchor ourselves to things, beliefs, and identities that, in reality, serve only to limit our growth and keep us trapped in cycles of superficial fulfillment. We are now encouraged, even coerced, to attach ourselves to material possessions, social status, and online personas, constructs that promise satisfaction, but ultimately leave us feeling empty. Take, for instance, the phenomenon of consumerism. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, we are bombarded with messages telling us that we are incomplete, that we are not enough as we are. The solution: consumption, the purchase of products, services, and experiences that promise to make us whole. This is not by accident. It is the very foundation of capitalist economies, where the goal is not just to sell products, but to create perpetual attachment. We are encouraged to believe that our happiness, our identity, and even our worth are tied to what we own. The latest phone, the newest car, the trendiest clothes. Each new item becomes a symbol of success, a marker of social value. We believe that by acquiring these things, we are securing our place in the world, building our worth on the shifting sands of material goods. But this attachment is not just about consumerism. It's about control. Capitalism thrives on our attachment to consumption because it keeps us in a constant state of wanting, a never-ending cycle of desire. The moment we acquire something, we're told we need something else, something newer, something better. It's as though we're tethered to an invisible leash, always pulled forward but never able to break free. This never-ending pursuit of more prevents us from ever finding true fulfillment. The more we attach ourselves to these things, the further we move away from the things that truly matter, the deeper connections, the internal peace, and the authentic experiences that cannot be bought. Social media has only intensified this attachment. The digital world has created a new form of attachment, one based on the need for validation. Every post, every like, every comment becomes a currency, a measure of our value in the eyes of others. We've all felt it. The momentary high when we receive a flood of notifications, the rush that comes with being seen, liked, and praised by others. And yet, this validation is fleeting. It's a temporary fix, a sugar rush that leaves us wanting more. The moment we post something, we immediately check for responses, looking for approval, searching for confirmation of our worth. This need for external validation is a form of attachment that is, by its very nature, unstable. The approval we receive online is conditional, dependent on the whims of algorithms and the opinions of strangers, and yet we tie our sense of self to it, attaching our worth to something as transient and unreliable as a social media post. The more we become addicted to this validation, the more we lose touch with our true selves. We begin to measure our value by how many followers we have, how many people comment on our posts, how many times our content is shared. We start to believe that our worth is determined by these external markers, and in doing so, we create a prison of our own making. The result: a generation of people who feel more isolated than ever, more disconnected from themselves, and more anxious about how others perceive them. But the attachments go even deeper. Capitalism and social media are not the only forces at play here. The media, in its various forms, perpetuates a system of attachment by selling us narratives that reinforce the idea that happiness is something that can be obtained through external means. Movies, television shows, advertisements, all of them tell us stories where the pursuit of success, fame, and wealth is the ultimate goal. We are constantly shown images of the ideal life, the perfect house, the perfect body, the perfect partner. These images are not just representations. They are idealized versions of what we are told we should want. They create attachments to a standard of perfection that is, in reality, unattainable for most people. This media-driven attachment is dangerous because it shapes our desires and aspiration, often without us even realizing it. We begin to believe that we are entitled to these things, that they are necessary for our happiness, and when we cannot attain them, we feel inadequate. We start to measure our success not by what we've truly accomplished or who we've become, but by how closely our lives align with the glossy, curated images we see on our screens. We start attaching ourselves to an image, a version of reality that does not exist outside of the media's narrative. This is where the danger lies: attachment. In all its modern forms, whether to material goods, social approval, or a carefully crafted ideal, is not simply a personal issue. It is a societal issue. The attachment to things that do not bring real fulfillment traps us in a cycle of consumption and validation, keeping us tethered to systems that profit from our insecurities and dissatisfaction. The more we attach ourselves to these external sources of validation, the less we invest in the internal work necessary for true growth. We become distracted, forever chasing something that will never be enough, and in doing so, we relinquish our freedom. It is not just our wallets that are drained by these attachments, it is our souls. The constant pursuit of external validation and material wealth robs us of the time and energy we need to invest in the things that truly matter: our relationships, our passions, our sense of purpose. Instead of seeking internal fulfillment, we are taught to seek external symbols of success, each one offering only the illusion of happiness. We attach ourselves to these illusions, not realizing that in doing so, we are relinquishing our ability to live authentically. Modern society, in all its complexity, creates a perfect storm for attachment. Through capitalism, media, and social media, we are systematically encouraged to tie our identities to fleeting, superficial things. The more we attach, the more we are controlled, and the more we remain attached, the less we are able to experience the freedom and fulfillment that come from letting go. But the path forward is not simply about rejecting these attachments. It is about awareness. It is about recognizing the ways in which society encourages us to attach and understanding the consequences of these attachments on our mental and emotional well-being. Only then can we begin to detach from these forces and find true liberation, not in what we own, how we are perceived, or the images we project, but in who we truly are when we strip away the layers of societal expectation and external validation. The question remains: how much of your life is truly yours, and how much of it is dictated by the attachments society has created for you? Imagine for a moment what life would look like if you were no longer bound by the expectations of others, no longer tethered to the fleeting desires of a world constantly telling you what to want. Imagine that the approval of others, the pursuit of status, and the validation of your existence by external forces no longer held sway over your life. What would you be? What could you accomplish if you were free from these attachments? This is the power of detachment. To truly understand the transformative power of detachment, we must first acknowledge the very real challenges that have kept us chained. The world we live in encourages attachment at every turn, from the pressures of consumerism to the constant need for external validation. We are conditioned to attach ourselves to things, people, and ideologies. But what if these attachments, the ones we've cultivated out of necessity or desire, are precisely the things that are holding us back from realizing our fullest potential? Detachment doesn't mean abandoning the world or renouncing human connection. Rather, it means reframing our relationship with the things and people we hold dear. It means recognizing that true freedom and fulfillment do not come from attaching ourselves to external circumstances, but from embracing an internal sense of strength, authenticity, and autonomy. This is where the power of detachment lies, not in what we give up, but in what we gain: the ability to live authentically, independently, and with profound purpose. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus argued that freedom comes not from external conditions, but from the ability to define oneself against the backdrop of an indifferent universe. Sartre's concept of bad faith, the act of living in accordance with societal expectations, rather than one's true desires, speaks directly to the heart of attachment. In Sartre's view, we become slaves to the expectations of others when we attach ourselves too strongly to social roles or conventional ideals. Detachment, in this sense, becomes a rebellion, a refusal to be defined by others, a reclaiming of our freedom to define who we are and what we stand for. To detach is to embrace individuality, to resist the temptation to become a reflection of the world's demands. The power of detachment is not merely about rejecting attachments, but about transcending them. It is a call to rise above the forces that seek to shape us and to reassert control over our own narrative. This shift from attachment to detachment is an invitation to transcend limitation and access a deeper, more authentic version of ourselves. But how does one begin the journey of detachment? The process is not immediate, nor is it easy. It requires a profound change in mindset, a willingness to confront the discomfort of letting go. In fact, the very first step in the process of detachment is acceptance, the realization that attachment is not inherently wrong, but that excessive attachment to the wrong things can limit our potential. Detachment does not imply that we cut ourselves off from everything, but rather that we stop allowing external forces to dictate our sense of self. For example, think of someone who spends their entire life chasing societal approval, constantly seeking validation from others. At first, the pursuit seems harmless, maybe even noble. But over time, this need for validation can become a trap, with the person so consumed by others' opinions that they lose touch with their own desires and values. To detach is to recognize this cycle and break free from it. It's to realize that self-worth cannot come from outside sources, but must arise from within. One of the most powerful forms of detachment is the process of letting go of the need for external validation. This doesn't mean rejecting love or connection, but rather liberating oneself from the need for approval in every action. When you stop seeking validation for everything you do, when you stop requiring others to affirm your choices, your worth, and your purpose, you open up the space for true self-expression and fulfillment. You no longer live in the shadow of others' expectations, but instead stand in the full light of your own truth. Think of the countless individuals throughout history who have transcended societal limitations through detachment. The philosopher Diogenes, for example, rejected all material wealth and social status, choosing instead to live in accordance with his own principles of simplicity and self-sufficiency. Diogenes' detachment from the superficiality of the world allowed him to live with an unmatched sense of freedom, a freedom that was not defined by the wealth he accumulated or the recognition he received. His life became a powerful testament to the strength that arises when we release the need to attach ourselves to fleeting things. Carl Jung's insights into the psyche also speak to the power of detachment. Jung argued that the path to self-realization requires an understanding of the shadow, the unconscious aspects of ourselves that we suppress or reject. In order to realize our full potential, we must detach from the false identities we have created and confront these repressed parts of our psyche. Detachment, in Jungian terms, is not about renouncing the world but integrating the shadow, embracing the parts of ourselves that we have rejected, and in doing so, becoming more whole. It is only when we release these false attachments, these projections of who we think we should be, that we can fully step into our authentic selves. In today's world, where we are constantly bombarded by images of perfection and success, detachment can be a radical act of resistance. It is an act of choosing to live without the need to compare oneself to others or measure one's worth by external standards. When you detach from these societal pressures, you become more attuned to your true desires, your inner voice, and your sense of purpose. This is where the power of detachment manifests most strongly. It empowers you to live life on your own terms, to follow your own path, and to create your own meaning. But detachment is not just about rejecting the external world. It's also about turning inward and letting go of the internal attachments that hold us back, we can be just as attached to our own fears, doubts, and self-imposed limitations as we can be to external validation. These internal attachments, often deeply ingrained from years of conditioning, can be the most difficult to release. Yet, when we detach from these inner constraints, we open up the possibility for growth and transformation. We allow ourselves to become who we truly are, free from the suffocating influence of past conditioning. The power of detachment is not found in the act of renouncing the world, but in embracing a new way of relating to it. It's about stepping back from the attachments that confine us and allowing ourselves the freedom to explore, to change, and to grow. It's a path towards self-empowerment that begins from within. When we release our attachment to the need for external validation, when we stop identifying ourselves through the lens of social expectations, we unlock the full potential of who we are meant to be. In the end, detachment is not about giving up everything you love or cherish. It is about transcending the need for external validation and recognizing that your true worth is not dependent on what you own, how you look, or what others think of you. Detachment is about finding the freedom to be yourself authentically and unapologetically. It is a powerful, liberating force that allows us to realize our full potential, free from the chains of attachment that seek to keep us small and confined. Through detachment, we discover not a life of emptiness, but one of profound richness, a life where we are no longer slaves to external forces, but masters of our own destiny.